Good evening. Welcome. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and go ahead and get us started here. Hate to break up a good conversation, but I'd like to move on to the program here. So we're attempting to have a zero waste event. Our friends from Food Loops are helping us achieve that. So please leave all your plates and cups with them, and they'll recycle and compost and take care of those appropriately. Before we start, I want to give a special thank you to Crystal Bridges, Sarah, Chantal, Kelsey. Thank you. The whole community engagement team. You've been great partners in this, and thank you for hosting and your beautiful venue. Also want to thank the Walton Family Foundation for their ongoing support of our speaker series program. And special recognition to our caterer. I don't know if Nate is in here, but Nate Walls and his team at Secondhand Smoke not only provided the amazing food tonight, we told them light hors d'oeuvres, and they showed up with like this full spread. So we all benefit. But I don't know if you know this about them. They also provide meals for those in need across Northwest Arkansas. So they're doing great work. So Northwest Arkansas is at an inflection point. Many of you have heard me say this. Historically, the region has been regarded as one of the nation's top regions to live, with overall affordability being one of the main attractors. Over the last few years, the region has seen exponential rise in housing costs fueled by rapid population increase, elevated construction costs, and ultimately the underproduction of homes. Teachers, nurses, firefighters, other members of our essential workforce are finding it more and more difficult to find housing in the central business core and are being pushed away from our communities because they simply cannot afford housing. Incubated at the Northwest Arkansas Council, the Workforce Housing Center is laser focused on creating and catalyzing the development of attainable housing options in every community in Northwest Arkansas. Through our convening and advocacy efforts, our goal is to create an environment where a variety of well-designed housing options in mixed income neighborhoods for our region's workers and their families can be built, while ensuring the characteristics and charm of each of our communities remains. Tonight, you'll hear from a panel made up of a community advocate, a former, we had another panel member who was the planning director in Washington, D.C. Her flight got interrupted, and I did not correct my introduction, so my apologies. Representatives from the 11th Street Bridge Park, who over the course of the next hour will share a decade's worth of work and collaboration in an attempt to curb displacement in the historic Anacostia neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Megan Kimball, our moderator tonight, is a freelance journalist based in Austin. Tonight's discussion is rooted in a piece she published in August in the New York Times entitled, "Can Anacostia Build a Bridge Without Displacing Its People?" So tonight I ask, can Northwest Arkansas continue its growth without excluding those that already call Northwest Arkansas home? Megan's piece tells the story of a community coming together to make their voices heard, to enrich their existing community, not accelerate gentrification and displacement. With that, I hope you leave inspired and energized tonight. I hope you leave empowered to make your voice heard as our region continues to grow and continues to welcome 36 new people every day. Now it's my pleasure to welcome today's panelist. Kimon Freeman is the co-owner of We Act Radio. Kimon was instrumental in the establishment and is still an active board member of the Douglas Community Land Trust, which ensures some amount of housing affordability remains in perpetuity throughout Washington, D.C. Scott Kratz is the Senior Vice President of Building Bridges Across the River and has served for nearly a decade as the director of the 11th Street Bridge Park. Vaughn Perry is the director of the Skyland Workforce Center. Previously, Vaughn was with the 11th Street Bridge Park, where he led community engagement and education efforts in the Anacostia community. Vaughn is also an active board member of the Douglas Community Land Trust. And last, Megan Kimball, as I mentioned, is moderating. She's a freelance journalist based in Austin. Her work focuses on housing, transportation, and cities broadly, and has been featured in the New York Times, Texas Monthly, Texas Observer, The Guardian, and The Nation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Duke, and thank you all for being here. I think we're all excited to have this chat tonight. Just to give you a bit of the lay of the land, we're going to talk for about an hour and then open up to questions from y'all, so please be thinking of questions for us. But I thought I would start by just talking a little bit about how I got interested in this story as a journalist. So as Duke said, I live in Austin, Texas. I'm an independent journalist, and spent the last 3 years writing a book about urban highways. And as many of you know, most of the highways built in the United States through cities decimated Black and brown neighborhoods and were built with almost no community input. There's a movement now to remove some of these urban highways and reclaim some of that space for community benefit. So affordable housing, park space, you name it. And so I went looking for a community that had grappled with removing a highway and considered, how to restitch, how to rebuild community, how to reclaim space, and came across the 11th Street Bridge Park, which was sort of the inception was the removal of a highway bridge spanning the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. And I realized there was a much deeper story there that probably didn't fit in my book, and concurrently was in contact with an editor at the New York Times, and they had just launched a new desk called Headway. And the premise of this is to investigate the world's challenges through the lens of progress. So it's a sort of a new kind of area of journalism called solutions journalism, where you bring kind of similarly rigorous reporting that investigative journalists bring, which is what my background is, to solutions, to people who are really grappling with entrenched problems and trying to find a way forward. And so I emailed Scott Kratz one day and said, hey, can we talk? And ended up going to Washington, D.C. and spending almost 9 months working on the story. So it's really a pleasure for me to be able to follow up with these sources of these people I spoke to, over many, many months. But Scott, let's start with you. How did the 11th Street Bridge Park begin?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here in such a glorious space. So the 11th Street Bridge Park, I've had the honor of working on this for the last 12 years. And as Megan mentioned, we had an old, aged-out freeway that connected or went across the Anacostia River. Washington, D.C. has two rivers, the Potomac that everybody knows, and then there's the Anacostia River. And it reached the end of its lifespan and needed to come down. And so we saw this unique opportunity. Instead of demolishing all of this old infrastructure, could we look at repurposing it, saving some of that initial federal investment and extending its life, but think about it in a very different way. And really solving at its crux a key issue that the Anacostia River, like many freeways or many natural divides, has long divided the nation's capital. It's divided two different communities. It's divided by economic opportunity. It's divided by housing prices, by race, sort of you name it. So this idea started with, let's think about this idea of maybe building a park and physically and metaphorically bridging these communities. And we started before we engaged a single engineer or a single landscape architect or a single architect, just talking to local residents and saying, what do you think? Dumb idea? Good idea? We'd have over 200 meetings those first 2 years, talking to communities of faith, talking to nonprofits, talking to residents, business owners, sort of you name it. And that was really critical because I think, I know particularly the east of the river communities, often things happen without any community engagement. Things happen to this community, not with this community, or even sometimes for this community. So, we had all these meetings, and then only then did we realize, okay, there's some there, so help us define what should be on the park, drive every programming element on the park. an environmental education center, a urban agriculture, a place to grow food for a community that has one grocery store serving 75,000 residents, it's a huge food desert. A performance space was the #1 idea that the community asked for, a space that can amplify the voices and culture and history of the local residents. The community selected the design team. But when we're out there talking to the community, and I know this will be a large part of the conversation, but we heard a lot of those programming ideas, but we heard a much deeper need. We heard a need for housing, we heard a need for jobs, we heard a need for how do we ensure that the businesses that are there east of the river can continue to thrive in place, and that was really the catalyst for a larger equitable development work.
And the idea for the Bridge Park is, it's worth saying, came from the former DC Director of Planning, a woman named Harriet Dragoning, who was going to be our 5th panelist, but might still be in an airport somewhere. We hope the best for her. But as you told me, and she also told me when I was reporting, this idea, you had breakfast with her one day, and she said, "Hey, I have this idea. You're not an urban planner, you're not an architect. What captivated you about a bridge park to what was the idea, the bigger vision that you saw within that idea?"
Yeah, so I'm a museum educator. I had no idea I'd be building a bridge one day. That wasn't part of the larger career path. Worked 20 plus years in a Western History Museum, a kids museum, the National Building Museum, the first job that brought me to DC. But I'm also a nearby resident. I live a few blocks away from where the bridge is and where the Bridge Park will be. We're breaking ground later this year, which is very exciting. And when Harriet and I, were having that sort of fateful breakfast, and I asked what I thought was an innocent question at the time, which was what's happening with all this construction on the bridge that sort of unfolded into this sort of larger work that I've had the honor to lead for the last dozen years. I saw this opportunity to think, it's not just about a park, it's about how do you support the community's physical, economic, cultural, environmental health in a single intervention, while trying to undo the decades, the over 100 years of lack of investment that's there, and to think about doing this in a very different way. And most viscerally for me, I remember a day, so again, I live about 4 blocks away from where the bridge is, and I was talking to a neighbor of mine, and it was clear he had no idea where the Anacostia River was, more or less where the neighborhood of Anacostia was, where the historic home of Frederick Douglass was, and because we've created all these barriers between each other, between communities, right? And so this was an opportunity to rectify that and to create that metaphorical bridge between communities.
Kimon, I'm wondering if you can talk about what you thought when you first heard the idea for the Bridge Park, when you first met Scott, and what you were doing at the time, if you could share.
I don't particularly remember what I was doing, but I was sitting in my studio when this beautiful human being walked in, but I knew about the bridge before I spoke with him, and so if you ask me what my initial feelings were, I'm all about building new things, but I knew that was going to ring the dinner bell for gentrification and displacement, because historically, Black communities and communities of color have been separated by physical barriers, whether it be a highway, railroad tracks, or a river. And anyone that traveled to Washington, D.C., even the French embassy was advising their citizens not to come to Anacostia. That was like the thing. And then when France had their problems, we at Grill released a statement saying that we shouldn't go to France. This is not safe. Touche. So he came in the studio, and to his credit, he asked. See, this is the difference. He asked. He didn't tell me. He asked, what would it take for you to support this project? And fortunately for me, we had produced a radio documentary, award-winning radio documentary, I cannot say that enough, called Anacostia Unmapped, where we interviewed these people. I had a funder approach us, and they wanted us to interview these people who was going to be displaced and get their stories before they're gone. That was what was funded. And I said, okay. And I produced a documentary that showed resilience and resistance because we weren't intending to go anywhere. We're not going to walk quietly into the dark. So when he asked me that, I fortunately had read a book that my producer gave me that was titled Dudley Community Land Trust, The Rise and Fall of Urban Neighborhoods. It tells the story of South Bend, Boston, and Roxbury, and how the yuppies in the 80s were threatening to displace these people and how they was able to offset that. And so because I was armed with that information, I said we need a community land trust to negate that. And to his credit, he went out there and he got that done. Now, let's be clear, the community land trust is just one tool in the toolbox. He also created with LISC organization, a displacement-free zone that would be directly affected. So we had a center of concentration, and I think that's what needs to be happening here. I think this is what needs to be applied. And I don't know who I'm talking to in this room, so let me do a real quick survey. Raise your hand if you believe that housing is a human right. Okay, so the other people think that you should be able to charge as much as you want for housing, and if corporations own all the housing in the country, you're okay with that. But most of us know that we deserve to have a place to live. If you work, you should have a place to live. If you work in that area, you should be able to afford to live in that area, somewhere in that area, whether you want to call that workforce housing, whether you want to call that social housing, or whether you want to use the community land trust business model to get that. Those are the goals. Now, the greatest first lady in the history of America was not Michelle Obama. Some of y'all will probably expect me to say that. She loves George Bush. It is actually Eleanor Roosevelt who signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she also said that housing is a human right. And since I'm on that, let me close with this, if I can pull this up quickly. A little trivia here. Who said this? We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. Who do you think said that? Bernie Sanders? Martin Luther King? The angry black man in therapy on stage? Who you thinking? That was Martin Luther King. So we have to understand that we have been sold a false set of goods. It's not all or nothing, okay? It's socialism without capitalism is communism. Capitalism without socialism is fascism. And if you disagree, then I will gladly accept your Social Security check. If you disagree, the fire department can leave a bill for your house when you call them for an emergency. There are levels of socialism. We just want to apply it to housing. Should be applied to healthcare and a couple other things, but let's start with the housing. So we have been sold this set of goods that is paper or plastic, and that's it. That's fake news. We have our own bag, and it's recyclable, and we need to apply that type of thinking to everything that we do, because we're trying to reverse engineer all the inequities that have been put in place in this country that's exploiting all of us. And so this man building a bridge actually is a symbolic panacea that is going to actually take us across these troubled waters, because so many people are building walls. This man's talking about building bridges, bringing people together, and we all affected. And it doesn't matter if you white, black, or brown. If the number is high enough, it's going to affect everybody. And you shouldn't have to be a millionaire in order to live in downtown Benton, I don't think. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having us.
Thanks, Kimon. So let's stay on the community land trust for a moment, because for me, that was a really integral part of the Bridge Park story. Are people familiar with what a community land trust is? Should we recap that? So a community land trust, it emerged in the civil rights movement in rural Georgia from civil rights leaders, and it's basically a form of ownership where you separate the ownership of a structure from the ownership of land. So land is typically owned in community by a nonprofit, by a cooperative, something. It's owned in common, and then there's private ownership of the structure on that land, and it's a way to protect land from speculation or the private market. The reason housing becomes unaffordable is because land becomes unaffordable. And so typically the land is leased back to a homeowner through a 99-year ground lease at a very affordable rate, and it's a way to preserve affordability in perpetuity. And so there are land trusts all across the country. It's become an increasingly urban phenomenon. I've reported on it quite a bit, and that was one thing that really drew me to the Bridge Park, that they had independently come to the conclusion that, yeah, we need to do that as part of this park, which is sort of, I think, a thing that I had not seen before. So Vaughn, when you started, that was one of the first things that you tackled, was getting this community land trust up and running. Can you talk about how you came into to work with the 11th Street Bridge Park and what your initial year was spent doing?
Yeah, so I think at the time I was working with different environmental nonprofit that actually is going to be a partner on once the bridge is built, the Anacostia Watershed Society. But more importantly, I was a resident of Ward 8. And so I heard a lot of what I used to call this mythical bridge park, because I was like, there's no way it's going to come into my community. And it's a shame that I felt like that, but it's the reality of broken promises that we have had given to our community, where folks have said, we're going to come and we're going to build, and then they come and take whatever they need and then they leave. And so it was truly because of the community engagement, and I don't use that word community engagement lightly, right? I think there's community outreach when you're going in and you're telling people what you're going to do and you're checking off, and then there's real community engagement when you're going in and you're working with folks from the very beginning to find out from them, like, what are some of the ideas that they have, what are the solutions that they have, and how can I help them to implement the solutions in their own community. And so it was truly because I saw what I felt like was real, genuine community engagement from the 11th Street Bridge Park that I'm even here talking to you all today. They had a opening for an equitable development manager position. I had no idea what an equitable development manager position was, but I had 3 different people send me the job description, like, Vaughn, this is you. You should totally apply for this. And I was like, what? Like, I don't even know what that is. And I'm crazy, so I put my application in anyway. And the more and more I learned around, like, what were the goals of the 11th Street Bridge Park and its equitable development plan, the more excited I got about this potential role that I can have. And what it gave me an opportunity to do was to make a very real impact in the community that I lived in, to be a part of the process for making impact, not only for my family, but for generations of my family, for my friends, where I could have a seat at the table. And that, ultimately, I served as what I would call like the watchdog between the organization and the community. We had this thing called the Equitable Development Plan, which was basically feedback and input from community members, from city municipalities, from small businesses, from faith-based organizations. But this equitable development plan was made up of 40+ strategies. It included housing, it included workforce, it included small business, it included cultural equity. We're actually going through a 3rd version right now that's going to include health and wellness. But basically what it was an opportunity for the community to give feedback, to say, hey, listen, these are what the issues are in our community. These are some of the solutions that can bring resources and to help our community be what we want it to be. And so, we created this document, and one of the issues that came out of there was our Douglas Community Land Trust. And so my very first day on staff, we were hosting a community land trust town hall session. We're literally, we were just going in and sharing and inviting the community to come in and learn about what a community land trust is. Very much like you all are here right now. What are the benefits of a community land trust? How can it have an impact on my family? How can it have an impact on generations? Like, how do we make sure that we are keeping housing affordable? Wait, what does affordable mean? I bet if I ask that question, we get 100 different answers. I don't know how many people are in here right now, but what does affordability mean? Right? And so being able to ask the community, What do you think affordability means? And then take that answer and say, yep, that's what we're gonna go after. That is our goal. Like, it's not what we are telling them. We're not making a definition for affordability for them, but it's for the residents that already are living in this community. And so we started to have these conversations with the community. I started to identify and recruit people that can become a part of an advisory committee. People like Kamon, who thought of the idea, like, this is what we need for as a part of the equitable development plan, and others like him. And just to say, you know what, we often already know, the community knows what they need. Oftentimes they just need the resources to help them to carry out, whatever those ideas are. And so really that's what we've been doing, is just trying to put as much resources, whether they're financial, whether they're technical expertise. We brought in community land trust experts from across the country. Again, very much like what you all, I can't believe I'm calling myself an expert. 5 years ago, I didn't know what a community land trust was. 5 years later, we've been in the trenches, and it's like, we're getting called to speak on this stuff, and how we're making
10,000 hours makes you an expert.
What's that?
10,000 hours makes you an expert.
And it amazes me how, like, to me, I'm just this kid that lives in Southeast Ward 8, DC, who was able to get an opportunity to have an impact in my community. And now I'm in Bentonville, Arkansas, speaking to you all about how a land trust can be impactful in your own community. And so for us, it's really around, the last thing I'll share, I feel like I've been talking too much, is if you don't hear anything else from us, it's how are we putting decision-making power back in the hands of the community. And for us, that's what the Community Land Trust has been all about. Yes, it's about affordable housing, but it's not just about having them housed somewhere. It's about them having some ownership in the process as well. And so, it's really important for us to, and so the lens that we look at all our work is how can we make sure that we're putting decision-making power back in the hands of the residents.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughn. So Scott and Vaughn had both touched on the equitable development plan, and I wonder if we could get into that a bit more, because it's, I think, kind of the nuts and bolts of how the Bridge Park has really executed some of this, community development work. And I will admit, as a journalist, when I hear equitable development plan, I'm like, that sounds like some nice marketing copy that you have produced. But I think what is unique here is that it's really the engine behind a lot of your work. It's a living document. It has changed. It's also your accountability to yourself and the community. And I wonder if you can just talk about how that came to be and what it has become over the last, 8 years.
Yeah, when we started thinking about, as Vaughn mentioned, at its heart, it's how do we make sure that we're putting these decision-making power back into the hands of local community, and in order to ensure that residents that have been there for long-term residents can continue to not just stay and survive, but stay and thrive in place, right? So we started thinking, it was in my limited imagination, it was mainly going to be around housing. But it became very clear that while housing was really important, if residents didn't have access to wealth, didn't have access to jobs, to build businesses, right, then having access to safe and secure housing was going to be that much harder. So the aperture got a little wider, and our equitable development strategies opened up to preservation of existing businesses and workforce training. It opened up a little wider where we could get all those things right, but if we lose what makes Anacostia, if we lose the heart and soul of what makes that neighborhood what it is, that has enormous downstream consequences. So we added in arts and culture strategies. As Vaughn mentioned, they were currently in our third version, because this is always an iterative process, adding in health and wellness strategies. We'll soon be posting our draft strategies online, I think in the next month or two, for additional community feedback. So what are those? I'm not going to go through all 40 strategies, but we've stood up the Douglas Community Land Trust that's now its own separate 501c3. It's its separate nonprofit. We raised several $1 million to initiate some of the property acquisition. That's up to, how many units now? 238 units of permanently affordable housing. 2/3 of the board, right, and I'm wedged between two members of the board, are Ward 8 residents, right, that are making those decision-making controls. Every decision as the DCLT moves forward. We've seen 122 Ward 8 renters go through our home buyers club and now are property owners, right? Now they own their own homes, right? And this is critical for a neighborhood where 75% of three out of four of those residents are renters at greatest risk of displacement. And we've just graduated our 27th construction training program, right? The Bridge Park hasn't even started, we haven't even put shovels in the ground yet, and we've already seen over 150 East of the River residents be employed in construction jobs. So when our general contractor later this year comes to us and says, well, sorry, Scott, I can't find any East of the River residents to hire, we can say, well, here's a list of 150 people who are trained and in jobs, like try a little harder, and but it takes that level of intentionality that's really critical. So to date, we've been able to invest a little more than $86 million in these equitable development strategies. That's more than the cost of building the park, right? The park's going to cost about $75 million in construction costs, and we've already, and it won't open for 2 years, we've already invested $86 million in it. And what's critical is from the beginning, Megan, as you pointed out, that we were holding ourselves accountable. So from the beginning, we've been working with a senior research team from the Urban Institute who've not only set clear, measurable goals for each of these different strategies, they're evaluating what we're getting right and where we're getting wrong and where do we course correct. Because let me tell you something, we've not gotten everything right. We've tried things, we failed fast, we've corrected and moved ahead. The Urban Institute has been printing every year the white papers on this, if you Google Urban Institute and 11th Street Bridge Park, you'll see them all pop up. Last thing I'll say is that every year we hold a big town hall and invite members of the community, our stakeholders, who we're doing all this work for, to come in and tell us, like, what are we getting right? Where should we be moving, right? Which is that ongoing feedback loop is really critical.
One of the things I'll just add to what Scott's sharing real quick is we were also very intentional with the area that we wanted. It was like a very small geographic area because, like, we couldn't even, to do all of Ward 8, which is like half of East of the River, would have been too much. Like, we would have just gotten too much input, and it spans a number of different communities. So we wanted to be really intentional around working, with this 1 mile radius and really focus on this specific community. And then what I always caution people of is don't just look at our equitable development plan and say, hey, we need to take this and take it back to our community, but it's to look at our process. Because every community should have a different equitable development plan based on the needs of that community. And so, we often come in and we share with people, like, this is the process that we shared. And I believe that whether you already have an infrastructure or it's just really getting that community input, the equitable development process can be really important in communities, and it can give you it. That's the way that you can find out what are the solutions in your community, and then the next thing is just how do you find resources in order to implement some of those ideas.
And one last thing I'll say, just building up on, it was also really critical to make sure we weren't reinventing the wheel. There's amazing work. I'm sure, that is happening here in this region. There's amazing work that was already happening east of the river, right? So we did a larger asset map of all the nonprofits that were doing good work and made sure that they were at the table helping us create these strategies. And so when Reverend Jim from MANA said, hey, Scott, you should really think about running a home buyers club. We run one in Northwest DC. It was really easy at the end of the equitable development strategy, when that was one of the priorities that the community, one of the strategies that the community prioritized, to go, hey, Reverend Jim, remember that awesome idea you had to run a home buyers club? Maybe we can work together and figure this out, right? And we've been running the home buyers club for the last 6 years. So where there's a need that's not being met, sure, we can come up with new solutions, but often that work is already happening in the community. I think the magic of the secret sauce of the equitable development plan is this larger sort of multi-sector work that can feed and support each other's strategies.
So one of my favorite things that I learned reporting this story is about these workshops that y'all have done, the Community Leadership Empowerment Workshops, which are, I think, kind of a harder thing to quantify their impact. But I wonder if you can talk about them in terms of, community engagement is not just hosting a public meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. It's something much deeper and empowering people to show up and to know how to participate. Can you talk about what that's been like to lead? And I think you took one, Kimon, when you were starting the board. If you could both talk about those.
Yeah, she's talking about the leadership training that came in part and parcel with this, because this was the preparation so that we could actually challenge the status quo, because oftentimes the greatest power is convincing people they don't have any. You can't fight, that's a millionaire, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't matter. If you are here to tell your story, you have value. But what they did in this leadership training is that it prepared you so that you could walk into that room, speak with confidence, and know what you're talking about, okay? Because here's a fun fact. When we started the Community Land Trust in Washington, D.C., the mayor and the council members didn't know what that was. We educated them, okay? So oftentimes, a lot of these policymakers, they only represent the now. We are here to represent. And so the future hasn't happened yet, which means we can edit the future. We can't change the past, but we can edit the future. And so these clue trainings help us prepare for that. And I just want to make sure that we clear. Does everyone understand what we mean when we say equity? Because I want to make sure we all got it. Because equity and equality is two different things, okay? Now, for so long, we have been fighting for equality. Okay, Vaughn doesn't like this one, but I'm going to finish it strong, Vaughn. The 3 kids watching the baseball game, they don't have money for a ticket. They got to try to look over the fence. Equality is giving all those 3 kids a box to stand on. That's fair, a 1 box for everybody. Equity takes into account that those kids are at different heights and that the tallest doesn't need a box and the shortest needs 2. That's equity. Now they all can enjoy the game. Vaughn likes to say he's a radical. Tear down the fence. Am I quoting you right? I ain't quoting you right, okay. So we need to make sure that we're working from the same premise. And I need to say this for the sake of the cameras. When they raised their hands, I asked how many people think that housing was a human right. That was the majority of the audience for those who watched this. So I want to make sure that we all got that communicated. But those leadership trainings were instrumental in giving us the power and the confidence that we needed to challenge the authorities. Because oftentimes, this is the way it's been, this is how it's going to be. And that is no longer the case anymore. We're looking at that in terms of the environment. We're looking at it in terms of the water crisis, of which I'm a new author of books outside. Please check it out. We're also looking at the fact that housing has to be addressed, because otherwise, are we working from a premise that it goes to the highest bidder? Is these auctions, housing is only reserved for the highest bidder. You didn't make it, sorry. This is what we're readdressing. And the only reason I'm here because I had an award-winning radio documentary. We're here because you wrote a Future award-winning article in the New York Times. These guys need to be empowered. So we're here to deliver the message, to give you the tools to put in your wheelhouse so you can go forward with confidence to say that, look, this is how it's been, but here's another option. And so I urge everyone in the sound of our voices to claim their power, because what has been does not necessarily mean always going to be. That is the present. We're here to represent.
And yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you, Vaughn, what specifically are you teaching in those workshops? And talk about, so I sat in on one that you held via Zoom that was people in Dallas. So it's not just in Washington, D.C. I wonder if you can talk about what you're teaching and how you've exported it to other communities.
And I just wanted to add, so I think Kimon is a great testimony for Clue. Before he took Clue, he was really shy. He didn't say much. So I wish I could say I came up with the idea, but Scott and I were approached and really congratulated around this really inclusive process that we have been using in our community engagement. And yet they still offer, and yet there are still people that are going to be resistant to coming to the table because they don't feel like they have the right tools, or they don't feel like their voice is going to be heard. And is there something that we can do is there some kind of curriculum? Is there anything that we can do for folks that are like that? And so we reached out to this gentleman by the name of Bob Hoffman, who has just been doing amazing community organizing work for the last 40 plus years. And what came of that was our community leadership empowerment workshop. And so it's really three things. It's understanding the city planning process, it's personal leadership, and then it's community organizing. And so ultimately, the goal is that we can amplify the voice and the power of community residents. And so it's about 8-week class that it's about 30 hours. We're just giving community members tools in order, what I used to say is to be agents of change, and I've changed that to say to be system disruptors within the community. So that, as Kimon said earlier, so that they can tear the fence down themselves. They don't have to wait for anybody to tear down the fence, but they can start to tear down these invisible fences that exist in our healthcare system, in our criminal justice system, in our educational system, and so forth and so on. And so, it's first teaching folks just about themselves and the different ways that we have been programmed and the different experiences that we have. And then it builds on that to build on how we can connect with each other within community. It gives us tools around community engagement. It gives us tools around collaboration and partnership. And it's something that we found so much success in that, as Megan mentioned, I've taught a virtual class to a cohort in Dallas. I've taught people in Philly. We are just finishing up a national curriculum so that we can share them, with other folks across the country, because, this isn't something that we just want to hold for ourselves, but it's really, again, back to how do we make sure that decision-making power is going back in the community. I oftentimes, and I'm going to pick on nonprofits because I'm a part of one, but I think as nonprofits sometimes we take advantage of poverty, and we keep getting resources, and we want to just help people enough that they got to come back and ask us for help. We don't want to take that approach. We don't want the residents to need us. We want to work with them, but at some point, if they decide that they have it, then great, we can go on and work on something else. And so really that's what a lot of the crux of community leadership empowerment workshop is we don't need to continue to support people, but we're just going to give them the tools so that they can support themselves.
I just want to say that the market force prices is not the jolly green giant that lives in the hills that come down that terrorizes the people. Somebody is setting those levels, and we need to understand they are not in this room. Whoever's setting those magical, astronomical numbers are not in this room. But who are they? Can we identify them? Can we call them out? I guarantee you they don't live in your community. I guarantee you they do not live in your community. So you need to revolt in your thinking, and a leadership training and conferences like this and information like this will empower you to be able to do that. And I just want to give a shout out to my new brother, for the NWA Land Trust. Where you at? Just raise your hand right there. Grady, thank you. Grady just buried his mother yesterday, so give him some love right here. Brother Grady, give him some love. Give him love, y'all. And the reason I make this a point, he didn't know I was going to do this, but the reason I pointed out because he was talking about legacy, that his mother's death reminded him about his legacy, and we did say condolences for his loss. He was like, no, she left a legacy. She left a legacy, And see, oftentimes, the only good thing about death is it makes us appreciate life more, and he's clinging on to the legacy his mother left. What is our legacy going to be? Is it going to be the same old, or are we going to actually make it easier for our children, make it more equitable for our children? That is the legacy. And our communal land trust lasts for how long?
Into perpetuity.
That's a big word. That sounds like a legacy. So I just want to give it out. Shout out to Brother Grady. Thank you for teaching me about legacy today.
You're a hard act to follow, Kimon.
I've successfully completed the CLUE Leadership Training Program at the Douglas Community Land Trust. I advise it for your organization as well.
So I want to talk a little bit about the $86 million, I think, that's been invested in the Equitable Development Plan. You know, a lot of that we talked about, Scott, when I was reporting this story is kind of catalyzed by the bright, shiny bridge park. So there's this promise of this gorgeous park coming that is driving philanthropic dollars, private investment, because, by the way, that park, part of the promise is that it will increase adjacent property values. And so part of that equitable development money is in response to that incentive. You know, there's this driving urgency to invest money. And I wonder if you can talk about sort of that kind of, it's something of a vicious cycle, right? As you're responding to the problem that you are in part creating, and how you think you've sort of gotten around that, and what are some like, you know, what are things that maybe government agencies can learn that are kind of like independent of that bright, shiny bridge park, lessons that other communities might take? That's a very multi-part question.
Yeah, I'll start by saying, I mean, sometimes I think the reaction is just don't invest at all, right? And I have a hard time looking at a resident in Anacostia and saying, you don't deserve a waterfront just as beautiful as the waterfront in Georgetown, right? Like, that's not the answer, right? The answer is to be thinking about this in a different way, which is why we're here talking about our equitable development plan. But I think I think what the bright, shiny thing, in this case, the Bridge Park does, and then I'll get to your question, to answer your question directly, but it is both it is a convener, right? And it is also, it attracts resources, right? In our case, it attracts a significant amount of private resources, and that is extraordinarily helpful, right? But what you really want to do is get in even before that, right? And I think, and we were talking about this earlier, I think at the crux, and this has kind of been thread through a lot of our conversation, it's land, right? I mean, when we first started thinking about the Equitable Development Plan, we worked with senior scholars from the Urban Institute, this research agency in Washington, D.C., and did a larger map of, in that 1 mile area that Vaughn was talking about around the park, of all the parcels of land that the city owned, right? And maybe, instead of thinking about the highest and best use, e.g. the most dollars the city can get, like, that is an extraordinarily valuable resource. And once it's gone forever, right? So thinking about where there might be those opportunities where the city either owns or controls land, right? Well before these externalities come in that rise property values, would be a huge first step.
What about sort of lessons that maybe local government agencies could take away from your work? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one is there are things that the government can do really well, and there's things that nonprofits can do really well. And I think this is and by working together, we can make an even bigger impact. I'll give you an example. The city has I'll start with the other. Nonprofits can be much more nimble, right? I think sometimes the cities can be this like massive battleship or aircraft carrier that takes forever to sort of turn. Nonprofits we're out there and we can test and pilot different programming ideas, and then if they work, right, we can sort of de-risk those, and then the city can step in and put significant resources behind it. And I'll give you one example. The city, and this has been a little bit of a sideways journey, but the city has put $2 million for property acquisition for the Douglas Community Land Trust, right? But that's only after we ended up raising $3 million and starting the sort of DCLT. So I think there's the things that the nonprofits can do well. There's things that the city can do well, and I think if the city reaches out and figures out where those collaborations and partners, they don't necessarily have to have all the answers, is key. When we're creating this third version of the Equitable Development Plan, one of the lessons that we learned is that the $86 million invested in the community is great, but there's over $1 billion of economic development that's coming in Ward 8 in the next 5 years. $1 billion, right? So the $86 million is a little bit of a drop in the bucket. One of the things we're looking at doing, working with the city, is where are there levers, where are there policy changes that we can make, where are there the displacement-free zones, where are there opportunities to freeze property taxes for our seniors who bought that house 40 years ago for $30,000 and now it's valued at $500,000, and they're not going to be able to afford it, and they certainly aren't going to be able to afford to give it to the next generation and the next generation, right? So we're hoping that out of this next version of the equitable development plan, we can have these very explicit policies, suggestions, recommendations that are coming from some of our city partners, but just as importantly, if not more so, from the community itself.
So y'all are trying to do a lot in addition to building a bridge. I'm curious if you can talk about some, as you've implemented this equitable development plan, what are some challenges you've encountered, maybe besides fundraising, because that's the obvious one, and how have you navigated those challenges?
Yeah, I think I'll hop on the, you asked about government, and I think some of our challenges has been convincing government around, one, that we're not competing with one another, but we want to work together, and our goal is to enhance the vision and the plan that the city has. And so we're not competing for resources, but it's like, how can we expand on what you already have? But two, educating them in a way that they understand some of the strategies, like Kimon was mentioned before. Not only was it important for us to educate the community residents on the community land trust, but we probably spent more time educating the city officials on what are the benefits of a community land trust. And then I think three, it's the turnover that you often have with elected officials. And so all of this work is undergirded in our relationship building. And so you can do all of this work and you can convince somebody that, you know, this is a great strategy, and then they decide they're leaving office or they are voted out of office, and you got to start that process all over again. And so I think that's one challenge. And two, it talks about funding, but it goes more specifically to capacity. You know, I'll steal something that Scott says all the time. We haven't had the opportunities. We have 75,000 people that live in Ward 8. We haven't had an opportunity to speak to all 75,000 of them yet. And so not everybody knows about the 11th Street Bridge Park yet and knows about the benefits in our equitable development plan. And so it's just having the capacity to go out and do the real community engagement that needs to take place.
I'd add two other things to that. One is, so much of this work is, this isn't just the two or three of us that's out there. All of this work is based on partnerships, right? That's absolutely critical. I mean, the staff of the Bridge Park is, 8, 9 people, right, at this point? So, and a bulk of that $86 million that we've invested was through a local nonprofit called LISC DC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, that's invested tens of millions of dollars. But when you're thinking about partnerships, what's really key is right from the beginning, I mean, not only set expectations and what roles and responsibilities are, but to ensure on a much more fundamental level that you share the same values. Because we've had partnerships where it was clear that we didn't share the same values. And so no harm, no foul, but then, okay, we're going to go a different direction. And you know, during the pandemic, we were, right at the beginning of the pandemic, we were deeply concerned that the community that we serve every day was going to be disproportionately impacted by COVID, and unfortunately that was the case, highest death rate in the city. And so we banded together with 3 other nonprofits and launched a larger unconditional cash transfer program, providing cash directly to residents. But we actually, at the very beginning, we had to slow down the process because it was pretty clear that these 4 nonprofits, we're not all on the same page. And we actually, much to the frustration of some, but we stopped to create a larger value statement about what is it that we're really trying to accomplish. And we set out these so incredibly valuable that, you know, that we value our residents to trust our residents to make the right decisions, right? It was this sort of key value that we all want to see a larger racially equitable city, right? I mean, so sharing those values was absolutely critical.
Don't sell grandma's house.
Great. So I have one more question for y'all, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions. But for all three of you, for me, as I approach this story, I think the story of the 11th Street Bridge Park is fundamentally a story about Anacostia, about this historic neighborhood and the neighborhoods that surround it and its future. And I guess thinking about the future of, this neighborhood, these neighborhoods, like what worries you and what are you most excited about?
I'll start. I wish, even though by the time the park opens in 2026, and we invite you all to come to Washington, D.C. on July 4th, when we're celebrating our 250th anniversary of this great country, the park will be open. It's going to be amazing. Celebrate 4th of July in D.C. on the Bridge Park. But I worry, even though by the time the park opens, we'll have been investing for 10 years in these equitable development strategies, that it's still not enough, right? It's like we're constantly asking ourselves, like, how do we create new partnerships with the city, with new nonprofits? How do we bring more resources to make sure that those thousands, tens of thousands of residents that shaped every single element of the park, right, are the ones that this can benefit? Because ultimately, like, that's the goal, right? And I think we've made some promises, right? We've built I certainly have built trust with friends, right? The coworkers, that are looking really closely at what we're doing, right, and are holding us accountable. But that I wish we had more time. I wish we had more resources. But we're doing the best that we can with both.
And as Scott says, I wish we had more time. I know we have to wrap up. I do have a call to action for you all. I want you to look around in the room and look at one another. And I'm here to share with you, you have all of the resources you need right here in this room. And if you have an idea, and if you can do it by yourself, it's not big enough. I'm going to say that one more time. If you have an idea and you can do it by yourself, it's not big enough. And that talks about the importance of collaboration and partnership. And you have enough people and resources in this room right now to really make some amazing impact in your community.
Come on, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'll end it with the arts. Typically, developers who are some of the smartest people, they're social engineers. They envision, they have 30-year plans. They are aware of all these issues. We have to make them aware of the solutions. And some of them will actually agree with this, because they already, when they want to move into a sketchy neighborhood, what do? They bring in the artists. They make it eclectic, and then once it starts being populated and it reaches a critical mass number, then they come in with the cranes. Look at this beautiful establishment. I wonder what this was, what it looked like before it was here. Now, was this part of the reason why we're seeing the skyrocketing housing market in this area? Probably so. So now they should have an invested interest to make sure that the people that was here before get to be the people that's here now and in the. That's only the equitable way. And I don't think we're asking for any fair concessions or extreme demands. I think is actually normal. The people here before should be the people that enjoy it now and in the future. And I think that if we all come together and do something, we can make that happen. And I'm glad that we was able to be here, and I hope that we inspired you and fired you up and gave you the energy you need to carry forward and give you new options to implement, because there is another way, and this is one of those options.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of just share one thing just building on that displacement is not inevitable. Right? I think one of the reasons why the 11th Street Bridge Park's Equitable Development Plan has resonated, and why we're consulting with nearly a dozen similar projects around the country, right, is because we're trying to break through that cynicism of just like, well, when you invest in these like underinvested, typically black and brown communities, that's what happens, collective shoulder shrug, right? But like, no, there's another way, there's another process, right? And I encourage everyone to go to bridgepark.org. There's tons of resources that are on there, short videos that outline our 7-step process to engage the community to create strategies that work here, right, in Northwest Arkansas. You can read our equitable development plan and reach out to us. Like, we have learned from our colleagues around the country at every step of the way, and if we can pay it forward, they would love to, because we should make sure we're not all making the same mistakes at the same time across the country.
Well, I'd love to hear from y'all so I can stop asking questions. I think there's a mic. Do you guys have a microphone if you want to just raise your hand or stand up?
So can you share a little bit about the initial funding source that catalyzed this idea, but also I'm sure 150 million has funding sources from all sorts, but on the private side, aside from individual investors, did you have corporate support? And how did you engage the corporate community to get that? And how much support has the municipalities been?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to try not to get super wonky, but and later please come to me and I'll be happy to get wonky with you. It sounded weird. Anyways, so you look at the construction of the park, you add all in like construction and management fees and blah, blah, blah. It's about 92 million. Half of that has come from the city. So $45 million has come from the city. The other half, we, Building Bridges Across the River, are raising. And that's through a variety of foundations, the corporations, individuals. We've gone after some federal government grants, that we've applied for and have been successful with. If you look at the $86 million of equitable development work, a bulk of that was, we got an early grant. When we started, there were 2 staff and $0, right? So we did not, sometimes I think people look at the bridge park and like, oh, you had all this money. We had 2 staff and $0, right? But what we had was a local nonprofit, this local initiative support corporation, that believed in that we had this opportunity to follow a new path. This woman by the name of Araminta Newsom, she was the head of LISC's DC office. She passed a couple years ago.
Rest in peace.
A amazing woman, a mentor of mine. And she donated half of her full-time staff who was a planner, to say he's going to help, a gentleman by the name of Adam Kent. He's going to help you figure this out, right? And so we came to the end of this process, and Araminta said, like, we need to help implement this now, right? And so they went away and they pulled together dollars, and they made an amazing announcement in May 2016. This was 5 months after we announced our first version of the Equitable Development Plan, that they were investing $50 million in that 1 mile area. In the previous 30 years, LISC had invested $2 million. So they were saying, we're going to go from $2 million to $50 million. They've blown past that $50 million. They've now invested $67 million in that area. Now, that's not all grants. That's LIHTC deals, that's new market tax credits, it's a variety of dollars. And then finally, we've been very successful at we applied for a very competitive grant through JP Morgan Chase. It was called Advancing Cities. They gave 3 grants across the country, $5 million each. We were selected in 2017, and that was a huge kickstart to this effort, because this big bank gave us $5 million, $3 million of which went for property acquisition as part of the Community Land Trust. $1 million went to support small businesses. Another $500,000 went to support the workforce training. And since that, and that I think really gave a green light that, okay, this is real. This is something that we're going to do a little differently. And we've since been able to attract some larger national dollars from the Kresge Foundation, some foundations in New York and elsewhere. But anyways, that got a little wonky, but hopefully not too deep.
Was part of the legacy of Araminta Newsom.
So I might not be tracking with the grants and the donations and stuff exactly. I'm a real estate broker. I'm pretty practical when it comes to how are we going to get these people to buy these properties, or do they buy these properties? And if so, what's the funding source for that? Because in my experience, when you talk about a land lease or a trust, they're not owning the land. That makes government insured loans like FHA, VA, USDA, it makes those loans not attainable. So what's the funding source for those folks that want to buy these affordable housing? I'd love to know, because this is something we can implement in our area.
A lot of it It turned green and then it went red. So that is certainly a part of the education, is educating funders about community land trust models. Now, when I say that, what happens oftentimes is, like in a traditional home market or home transaction for a community land trust, one model could be if the house is $400,000, an individual is getting financed for $200,000, and the land trust is coming in and financing $200,000. So, and they can still get this $400,000 house, but all they need is $200,000 financing. And so, but in order to agree to that, the land trust will say, listen, as long as you're on this property, it's your home and you can do what you want with it. However, if you ever decide to sell, then there's going to be a shared appreciation value. And so there's going to be agreed upon percentage where 75% could stay in the home, 25% will go to that homeowner when they decide to sell. So let's just say they come in 10 years later, they decide to sell, and that house that was worth $400,000 is now worth $500,000. They would take whatever equity they have in that home, and they take that additional $25,000, and then $75,000 would actually stay in that home. So you have that initial $200,000 subsidy. You have an additional $75,000, and so now that's $275,000. Subtract that from the $500,000, and now you have somebody 10 years later that can still afford that home for $225,000. And I know I segued off of your question a little bit about the financing, but in our experience, we've just been working with traditional banks, and we've had to educate them on like the CLT model and how it works, and show them different examples across the country. And many of these banks have banks, in other parts of the country where they can learn, like, this isn't something that's new. Community land trust is something that's already been taking place.
A great resource too, if you Google, and it's free, Lincoln Land Institute has a really wonderful sort of short booklet. It's called the City CLT Partnership. So Google Lincoln Land Institute City CLT Partnership, and it walks through all of those models that Vaughn just talked about, as well as doing a much deeper dive in financing, and it's a great primer. The other great resource for Community Land Trust is called Grounded Solutions Network. It's the largest coalition of CLTs across the country. There's over 300 of them in the United States alone. And they have a wealth of information that's on there and we've had conversations with Fannie and Freddie about finance, and CLTs are, as Vaughn mentioned, have been around for decades. Increasingly traditional lenders are looking at them as like, okay, this isn't such a weird duck after all. We can figure out how to work with them.
The last thing I'll say is often some of the most frequent questions we get is, how's that going to have an impact, or how's that going to affect the value of the market? It doesn't. Like, that house that's $500,000, whether it's a CLT or not, is still worth $500,000. And so it doesn't change the value of the homes. What it does do is allow for homeowners to potentially purchase it with lesser financing.
I think we probably have time for just a couple more. Here, Solomon.
First, I want to say, Duke, this is the best event of every event in the series. So thank y'all for coming out tonight. I'm so excited to hear a conversation about community land trust and community control. To distill my question down, I think it is, do you have any advice for a community that's much earlier in the process, thinking about who is on, how you identify people to be collaborating in leadership, to be on a future board, so that there's integrity in the process ultimately? And to add just a little context, I've had some conversations with people about land trusts in Northwest Arkansas, and one of the worries that comes up is the same people, the good old boy group, gonna populate the board of that land trust? And then does it end up really being community control? And if we're gonna think about social housing, or we're gonna think about real equity, it can't end up like that. So do you have any advice for a community earlier in that process?
Yeah, great question, and it's great that you're thinking about that. And I think what was important for us early on was really making sure that we had a diversity of voices at the table, right? And making sure that we didn't exclude the gatekeepers, but the gatekeepers weren't the only ones that were a part of the process. And by gatekeepers, I mean the ones in the community where they feel like you got to go through them in order for anything to get done in the community, right? We wanted to make sure that we were as inclusive as possible, and we spread the net in the community to go after voices like that generally weren't heard, right? To go after the voices that they didn't have time to show up for every community meeting or every housing meeting. We hosted these town hall sessions and we invited people to come, but we then also invited them to be a part of the process. And so I don't know that anybody that expressed interest to be a part of the committee was able to be a part of the committee. I can't remember declining anybody early on, right? And so the folks, it was almost like people, they took themselves out of the process due to time or lack of interest or whatever, but the folks that were interested and they wanted to be a part of it, we invited them to become a part of the process. And through that, we had a very diverse advisory committee in terms of age, in terms of income, in terms of male versus female, and And so what it's allowed is to have some very robust conversations and discussions within the community land trust that was representative of the entire community. But we didn't, we didn't go into it saying we were going to exclude anybody. We went into it saying, listen, we want to get as many voices as possible. And then through that process, we wanted to provide them with tools in order to manage and organize effectively. For example, like we talked about community leadership empowerment workshops, where our pilot group was our Community Land Trust Advisory Committee, who went on to become the board for the land trust. Now, I'll say this. Really quick story. When we were transitioning to become an advisory committee, and there was probably about 15 members of us then, some of the leadership said, well, Vaughn, if we're going to become a board, we need to have this expertise, and we need to have this expertise, and we need to have this expertise. And it didn't include a lot of the people that had been a part of the process over the last 2 years. And I pushed back. Now, that's why it was so important for me to have a seat at the table, because it gave me an opportunity to have my voice and to push back for the community to say, hey, like, we need all of these folks that we have been providing resources and talking about the community land trust. We need to give them the opportunity to succeed or fail, right? And the sentiment was, well, Vaughn, we can't have this fail. Well, why do we think this is going to fail? Simply because the community is leading it. And so for us, so that's when we start to talk about decision-making power and putting the hands in the hands of the community. You have to give them the opportunity to succeed or fail. That's a part of this process. But if we are giving them the right tools, then we increase the probability that it's going to be successful. And so, again, I think it's just making sure that you start to have the conversations. I think it's being as inclusive as possible, and that you're giving folks resources along the way. I hope I answered that question.
I'll just add one quick thing, because I've reported in community land trusts across the country, so Austin, Atlanta, DC. And the thing I have heard across the board universally from everyone I've talked to is acquire land early by any means necessary. And I think it sometimes can feel sort of less urgent when land is not that expensive, when the housing has just begun to become unaffordable, but it makes everything harder down the line if you don't prioritize land acquisition.
And and Scott leaned over and he was like, Vaughn, and they didn't all agree. They didn't. And I think that was really our early on challenge is we had so many different voices and so many different opinions. What Clue allowed us to do is to really effectively navigate some very challenging conversations. One of which, again, I know we're wrapping up, but one of which was when we were hiring our executive director. I was one of the first ones to say, hey, listen, this executive director needs to look like me. They're representing mainly black folks, and we can't just go out there and hire somebody that looks other than black or that is other than black to lead this organization. And we did this whole national search, and we ended up with 3 finalists, one white man that lived in the UK, one black guy that lived in, I think he was in Georgia at the time, and then one white woman that lived in Washington, D.C. And by far, the white woman was the one that was the best candidate out of all of them. And we had to have this really challenging conversation in our group to say, where folks were just like, but Vaughn, can we really let this white woman lead the organization for a community that's mainly black people? And I told him, I said, listen, I'm putting off my Bridge Park hat, and I'm going to put on my hat as a black man. I'm going to put on my hat as a Ward 8 resident. We want the best for our community. And if she is the best for our community, and I believe she is, then this is the person that we need to go with. But I don't believe if it had not been for all of us going through that Clue experience, we would have been able to have that discussion in a way that was productive and impactful.
I think we got one over here, and then we'll come back here.
I just want to reiterate that he had a great question, and don't worry about it, brother. You're going to weed through that. They're going to expose themselves. Unlike what the Supreme Court says, corporations are not people. They will expose themselves if they have a different agenda than what the group has. So don't worry about it. It's a great question. It's something you should be on guard for, but you'll be able to figure it out.
Oh, one other thing. Most boards are tripartite board, which means a third come from the community, a third come from people that actually live in the units of the community land trust, and then a third comes from subject matter experts. And so at any time in any board, 2/3 of your board are actually coming from the community residents. And so again, that's another opportunity to make sure that decision-making power is remaining in the control of your community.
Thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited. I was feeling pretty down, okay? Because the work is so hard, and especially when you're in the beginning of it, as you explained. Clint, that is a great question. It happens everywhere, right? The situation we have here is that we have a near erasure of the black community, the very last one in the entire Northwest Arkansas area. And this erasure has been going on since 1865 when the people settled, I hate to use that word, settle, made their homes in Fayetteville because it was easier, and they, not just easier, they were going to end up working for some of the same people who enslaved them. And everywhere else, at least 1920, became a sundown town around, right? And Fayetteville is a university town. There's always work somehow. We have the opportunity to not let it disappear completely. And our little nonprofit cannot do it all alone. We need the city to step up. We need the entire region to step up, because the reason the black people were in Fayetteville is because they weren't allowed to be anywhere else. Even though they made all that money. You see how rich this place is? There's a reason for it. It's been rich for a long, long, long time. So, everything you're saying to me is so exciting. It gives me a little hope. But what did you say? You've got to get the land now. We're in a situation where people are selling off because they have been weathered. I forget the name of the scientist, right, who said that. You termed the term weathered. They're tired. They've been playing the The people have been playing defense for 158 years. It's even written down stuff that they had to go through, that they were that was imposed upon them. How do we get the city? How do we get the city councils? How do we get them to activate in this new way, in this different way, the non-status quo way, to make this thing happen? Because we have authentic culture, we have a lot to share, and we want this place to be exciting for everybody to enjoy. So, if you have any kind of help for me, for us, about how to maybe affect something immediate, because gentrification is serious and it's ongoing and it's at a peak right now that even the places, the spaces that were public spaces made for, that were in the Black community are being usurped completely. And I know Anacostia is different than this. It's not happening in the same way.
Yeah, I wish that is $1 million question, and I think short answer to that, and my fellow panelists might think differently, but for me, I focus less on the government and figure out ways that I can organize community so that they can understand that the power that they have and the collective power that they can have, if they pull together. It's the community that put the government in office, right? And so I think going off of what Kamon was saying earlier is like, I think oftentimes what we've been convinced is that we don't have any power, and this apathy has been built in. And so it's like, how do you change that dynamic? And to me, it takes time, right? That's part of relationship building. It's part of trust building. And there is no quick and easy fix, unfortunately, for it, right? We understand that in order to build these relationships, in order to build this trust, it's going to take time in order to do that. And that, we just wake up every day with the intention of doing that. And hopefully we can create some incremental milestones. And it's really important to still celebrate those increments, but they can build on one another. But again, there is this urgency now. Like that's the crisis that we have in DC, where we feel like oftentimes we're behind the 8 ball going after these properties that have already skyrocketed. But does that mean we give up? Nope, we can't give up. We still try to put forth an effort, and we still try to look at things that we can do right now. That's the best I have for that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to, in Anacostia, my building got paid for, and the mayor hates me. So, it's not about a loving relationship. It's about you having enough wherewithal that it's the logical solution, because she's been hounded for ignoring the housing crisis, and we actually delivered a solution to her doorstep. So I'm going to do a press conference and pledge $2 million. We ain't cut the check yet, but we pledged it. But when she did that press conference, guess what? It opened the floodgate for other support to come to us. You're here. We all are here because the producers of this event think that this is a viable solution, and they're recruiting all of you to support that, so they have an army when they move forward. You have the foundation behind you. You have this wonderful organization in this building behind you. You're not alone. And this is bringing a dinner bill to saying that it's time to come together and let's move forward with a new agenda. So I think the past is the past, but we get to edit the future. So again, everyone in this room, it's up to you to make that personal decision. Are you willing to work with this organization to move this forward? And I hope the answer is a resounding yes, and that could be our legacy.
And you're not alone. And you're not alone. Please come up and ask for any of our cards. We'd love to. We've learned a lot of things. We've learned a lot of things, what to do, what not to do, and if we can assist, we're here to help.
And just one more.
Hey guys, I was just kind of curious, being someone that's personally been affected by this issue, and I also seen family and friends greatly impacted by this issue. How can I get involved and get in the middle of this, to see that change happen as far as, dealing with the issue that y'all addressed.
What specific?
I'm just saying, mainly with the cost of housing and everything else with that. I mean, I've seen family and friends, struggle. I've personally struggled. I mean, it currently affects me as far as.
One of the things, because Vaughn said that you need to define for yourself what affordable is, and that's very true. Because I want to make sure y'all go for the okie-doke where they say, oh, we're going to allocate the 20% of this going to be affordable housing. What is that? $1 million house is affordable to somebody. What is affordable to you? And the HUD has a guideline that says 30% of your income, no more than 30% of your income, including utilities, should be allocated for housing. Okay? So whatever you make, sir, 30% of that, including utilities, is what you should be paying for your housing to live in this area. And if you work in this area, you should be able to purchase and buy and live in that area. And these are some of the reference points and guardrails that we should move forward in your demands. Okay? And that's not putting a number on it, it's putting a percentage on it. It's at your level, because we cannot reserve this strictly for millionaires. This is just the millionaires. No. So that is the quick answer to that, because there's no way that the teachers can't afford to live in this area, and the police can't afford to live in this area, and the firemen can't afford to live in this area, and the people who are serving in these restaurants can't afford to live in this area, and that be sustainable.
I'm gonna add to that. Get Duke's card, and you hold Duke accountable, and you make sure something comes from this meeting. And if you got to email and call Duke every single day until you get an answer, and you let them know that you want to be a part of the process. And I'm being dead serious right now.
And your voice is just as valuable as a millionaire.
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Your voice is just as valuable as a millionaire. There's a billionaire at the bottom of the ocean that wish he was in your shoes right now.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, there's 100 and some odd people that are in the room that I guarantee you feel just like you tonight before you leave. Like, make these connections, make one connection, two connection, meet Duke. There's folks doing really good work here. 3 people become 10 people, become 100 people, right? And that is the power of change.
Thank you. Well,
All
that
right.
was like a good note to end on.
Go ahead, Megan.
No, I'll turn it back over to you.
I got work to do, apparently. Can we give it up just for Megan, Kimon, Scott, Vaughn?
And the organizers of the event that brought us all here today.
Thank you all for coming. Actually, I don't have work to do. We got work to do.
That's right.
There we go.
So we thank you for your time, your commitment to this issue, your commitment to the region, and let's do this again in the coming months. Thank you so much.